Okay, so we continue on, and let's see, we're holding here and Daf Mem Hey Omid Beis. We just completed the discussion about whether or not kesef, money, can be used for kinyan chalipin, and of course we had the discussion about the machlokas, and so there is two mandamrim, and we didn't bring a raya. We weren't able to bring a raya from our Mishnah that we're talking about chalipin to be able to get a definitive answer, because the Gemara says that by all accounts we're talking about damim, an actual sale exchange, and not a chalipin. So we're left with a machlokes, and so now the next question that the Gemara now wants to address is, now that we have addressed the question of whether kesef can actually be used for chalipin, the question now is, can kesef, money, be a commodity that you can exchange in chalipin? In other words, okay, chalipin, whether you can use money or not, one question, but can money itself be one of the two items in a kinyan chalipin? What do we mean? For instance, you want to do chalipin between money and an object. I want to sell you my sofa, and you're going to give me money. So can money be part of the chalipin exchange? Not that money is going to be what you're making the kinyan on, but it's the actual transactional other object in the transaction. A sofa for money, something else for money. So that's a different question. And now the Gemara is going to try to address that and see whether we can draw any parallels, or is there any connection to the whole idea of what the machlekes is in chalipin itself to the subject of whether kesef can be one of the two items in the chalipin. All right, so now the Gemara is going to sort of give us an understanding of why that's a question.
Excuse me,
Take a look about 5 lines from the bottom of Mem Hey Amid Beis. Amarav Papa.
Excuse me, before you start. I had a question. When Avraham went to buy the cave, the ground, he paid with money.
That was not a chalipin. That was an actual transaction bedamim, and he insisted on that because he didn't want to have any question that there wasn't a valid transaction. So he didn't want to do anything other than pay money, because you know definitively that with money you're going to make a transaction. With chalipin, you can always maybe you can worry, was it a valid transaction? I mean, we see here all the dark clouds that surround chalipin. Can it be? Are you allowed? Maybe yes, maybe no. With damim, it's straightforward. I'm giving you money. You're giving me an object. In this case, it was the stay Ephron, and we have a transaction. He didn't want a gift. He didn't want anything. So Avram, again, even before we knew from halachas and anything else, Avram knew that bedamim, that when you buy something for money, that's a final valid exchange. No one can come later and say, I'm going to upend the transaction. For what? I mean, there was money and there was consideration. There was everything there, and that's the classic, way to convey anything.
So
but certainly,
what's the Gemara's question here? I must have missed the question.
Okay. Oh, you mean this new question? So the new question is, if we're going to do chalipin, not damim, we're going to do chalipin, can money be one of the two items in the chalipin? We know already that to use money for chalipin, in other words, that's the barter and exchange. That's when we have a machlokes. Some say yes, some say no, because it's tzura, it's suras kesef. It doesn't really have value. Okay, those are all questions having to do with whether kesef can be one of the ways to barter. But now the question is, if you're going to do a barter, what we call chalipin, you can do a chalipin. Can you do chalipin money for something? In other words, money isn't going to be the chalipin itself, isn't going to be the modus of exchange. It's going to be the actual article, the subject of one of the two items that you're going to change. So the Gemara has a havam in it that if you can't use money for chalipin, money can't be used as an object of chalipin. That's at least what the Gemara is thinking here. That's why it's asking the question. And that's why that's the next logical question. Can money actually be an item for exchange. I'm exchanging money for your glasses or
But
for
the
your.
the result is the same, whatever you call it. Whether you call it chalipin or you call it regular purchase, it looks the same to anybody else watching it.
Well, yes, to a degree, you're right, Jay. But then that becomes the question as to whether or not, if what you have in mind is not a classic case of purchase, does that affect the deal? Okay, does that affect the deal? You're right. From an appearance point of view, who knows the difference? But you know what you're doing, and the question is, what you have kavana for, does that fail for not being the right kind of transaction? So in other words, maybe the question is somewhat theoretical, but in a practical sense, if you're going to have in mind to use the money for chalipin, does that validate the deal? Or do we say, no, somehow that deal is tainted because a true chalipin has to be article for article. My sofa for your glasses, my bike for your whatever automobile. In other words, chafetzim, articles, not money. The whole idea about money that the Gemara seems to be telling us is that money is different than an article. Remember, we learn the whole idea of chalipin in Megillus Rus by Noal, by the shoe that was exchanged. That is a tangible physical item. Anything that is tangible physical is appropriate for chalipin, and by definition, what's not tangible and physical is not chalipin. Money is not a Noal.
Okay, but the one who's buying, okay, he has to have in mind whether it's process A or process B.
Right.
But the seller doesn't have to care about that. The seller basically is standing by. He's going to get his money for the stuff that the other fellow wanted to buy from him.
Right. So one side doesn't care, one does. The question here the Gemara keeps asking, or is asking, is does the fact that one side is questionable or question mark, does that upend the entire transaction? Not the other guy. The other guy is perfectly fine with what he's doing, but does the one guy make the whole transaction not valid because he's using money as being one of the sides of chalipin? The other side doesn't care. You're right. He's perfectly fine. But does the side with the money, does that invalidate the deal? So let's take a look.
Rabbi, I have a question too.
Yeah.
This is just tangential, just maybe, but okay. So what if you wanted to use a star as a chalipin or a check? Is that chalipin?
Okay, so in other words, you're asking about something that's money but not hard money. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Right. So it seems that whatever is defined as money is money. In other words, money doesn't have to necessarily be the actual coin, but if this is what money is, i.e. a check, I don't know, whatever they use.
Right, but there's a difference. You have a dollar bill that fits exactly what you're saying. That's defined as money, even though it isn't physically money. It's no longer a gold standard, silver standard, etc.
Right.
It's just a piece of paper, but it has universal representation as
we call
money.
We call it money.
Right.
Currency.
But a check is a promise to pay, and in fact, a check can bounce.
Right. So there is a discussion generally about promissory notes. Okay, what is a promissory note? And the discussion is that since promissory note is being meshubit to pay kesef, it doesn't say promissory note necessarily to pay with an item. It's a promissory note for money. So most of the dayas say that that's money, even though it's in the form of a note, but it's money. So I think for our purposes, we can say that a check, a shtar, anything that represents the actual money for our discussion is money. Okay, it is money because you can't equate it to say that it's a noal, that it's an item, because it's not an item. It's not a hard item, a sofa. It's not a pair of glasses. It's not a chair. It's clearly none of those. It's really money in another form. So again, to embrace it and say, what is it? The general consensus is that a promissory note is money. So I think for all intents and purposes, that's what we have to look at. We have to say that if he was giving a promissory note for the other item, that's kesef for the item. I think that's generally how I think the Rishonim and everybody else looks at it from that standpoint. But anyway, so in our Gemara here, let's just kick this off and let's see what's going on. Amrav Papa. Even according to the Manda Omar, remember Zamachlekes, who says that you can't use kesef for chalipin, it can't be an item for exchange. Maybe who delay of it chalipin, aknuya mikne b'chalipin, you can't use it for the exchange, but can it be aknuya mikne b'chalipin? But the coin itself can be acquired by chalipin. Why? Mida dahava apera Rav Nachman. All right, so now the Gemara is making a comparison, a statement, and saying, okay, I understand that you can't use the coin as part of the chalipin. That was our discussion. Why? Because the coin itself, according to some mandomrim, it's not the coin that has value. It's the tsura, and the tsura isn't the picture isn't certain because the government can recall the coin. All right, all of those reasons that we said, you can't use it for the actual exchange. But can it be the item? In other words, can you acquire a coin in exchange for an item? Different question. So the Gemara wants to say, yes, that even according to the Mandama who says you can't use it for chalipin, it can be acquired through chalipin. And what are they equated to? So the Gemara says, Midadahava Peira to Rav Nachman. What's Pshat Peira to Rav Nachman? Okay, so let's take a look. So Rashi says, Midadahava Apeiros to Rav Nachman, right? About 6, 7, or 8 lines from the bottom. Kol dover she'ein a kli, anything that's not a kli, meaning what? A no'al, which is what we learned from. Anything that's not a kli, kori peira. Its consensus is called a peira, a fruit, because it's not a kli. The gabi chalipin. Upliga, there's a machlekes, Rav Sheshes, Rav Nachman, which we're going to get to in a few weeks, and later on in the Gemara. Bishmatz and Omar Rav Nachman says in that machlekes, Noel dafke ksiv. It says in the Megillah, Noel dafke. In other words, it has to be a shoe. Shohaya kli. So what is a Noel? A Noel is a kli. Lo mishum davar she'ein a kli. V'lo mishum davar she'ein a kli osa chalipin. And anything that is not a kli, you can't make chalipin. You can't do the chalipin. Or modahu, and Rav Nachman is moda, shekol dover shekeneged hakli, that anything that is opposite the kli, meaning in that chalipin exchange, anything that is the other item, not the kli, nikne b'chalipe hakli, is actually acquired through the exchange. So Rav Nachman, who is the more machmir of the two, doesn't argue in that Gemara with Rav Sheshes, and he says, okay, you have to have a kli, but the other item in the exchange which is not a kli, which we're calling a peira, a fruit, which is sui generis to everything, that can be exchanged. Rav Nachman Beferish says you can exchange a peira for a kli, the ksiv, because it says on the pasuk there in Rus, l'kaim kol davar alma afagav the peira of the chalipin. Even though a peira cannot affect chalipin, meaning you can't exchange a peira for a kli, you can't exchange a fruit, i.e. money, or anything that is not a kli for a kli, liknos shekenegdo niknahu b'chalipin. But to be the object of the acquisition through the chalipin, that you may have, right? Given shemoshach bala peiros is a kli, because the bala peiros made a meshicha or agbo, whatever the kinyan is on the kli, nikne peiros the bala kli. So again, in that machlokes, which we will discuss in more detail in a few weeks, Rav Nachman is more machmir, and he says that a peire is not a kli. So therefore, if it's not a kli, everything else is a peira. He still allows you to take a kli, a noal, an item, and exchange it in a kinyan chalipin for money. Not that money is the making the kinyan, but money or the peira is the other object that you're exchanging it for. So we see Beferish in that Gemara that Rav Nachman, who is the more machmir, allows it to happen. So says Rav Papa that even according to the Mandama that says you can't use a coin for the exchange, but a coin can be part of the exchange. In other words, you can exchange an item for a coin because Rav Nachman himself says that it's acceptable, and Rav Nachman is the sort of the gold standard for not allowing it. And here he does allow it because he says you can exchange a kli for a payra, and money is a payra, like we've always said, in the past. So says the Gemara, payra Rav Nachman lava forgav the inulo of chalipin, even though you can't use the payri as the other object of chalipin. In other words, the chalipin will be with the payra. Aknuya mikna b'chalipin, but you can acquire it with chalipin, and tava nami loshno. So money should be no different because we're kind of saying that money is the equivalent of pri. Okay, so Rav Papa makes a definitive statement now and says that even though we can't use money as one of the two barter items to make the chalipin, but if you make a barter and money is what is the object opposite the kli, that is acceptable. So he's making a fine distinction here that you can acquire money through chalipin. You can't use it for the exchange, but you can acquire money through chalipin. That's what.
So Rabbi, how is that different? How does that distinguish in that situation a sale versus exchange? We talked about in one, you have a kinyan, and the other one you don't. So how do you distinguish which is which?
Okay, so if I'm coming to you and I said you have a nice sofa and I want to buy it, then I'm giving you money. I'm making a kinyan on the sofa. You now have a right to the money, and you have to collect it. It's not automatically yours, as we've said in the past, that when you make an acquisition with money, the money has to be actually physically taken into your possession, because it doesn't automatically become yours because of the nature of the transaction.
But hang on a second. I thought that in a kinyan situation, in a sale, it was a promise to pay. When you say it has to be in your possession, a kinyan is you can pay later. Right.
Right. That's exactly
versus an exchange
which is immediate.
So is that the difference?
That is the quintessential difference, is that when you do the exchange, the one person who is taking the object, the other person automatically immediately owns the money, and it's not an obligation to be paid later. So
an exchange is not a promise. Has to be conducted
exactly
at that time.
That's a very good way of putting it. It's not a promise. It automatically becomes his immediately. True.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay. So now Rav Papa making this distinction and saying that it can be used as an object for the chalipin. Now the Gemara asks a kasha, a terrific kasha, on this statement that Rav Papa now makes. So says the Gemara, but second, the bottom line, Meisvei. If now this is a kasha on Rav Papa. Rav Papa just said that you can, because he hangs his hat on Rav Nachman, who is a machmir, and says that you can't use money for the actual kinyan portion, but money can be acquired. Even Rav Nachman says it. Right? The Gemara. Following circumstance: Have a omid begoren. If a person was standing on the threshing floor, he had was threshing his produce, and he's standing on the threshing floor. Ve'ein biyado mos. He has no money in his possession. Omer lachavero, he says to his colleague here, his friend, "Hareperes halalu nosun chobamatana." Okay, we got to take a step back, and we've got to learn a little bit about the halachas of Maaser Sheni, which are fascinating. But let's talk about the halachas of Maaser Sheni so that we understand what this Gemara is telling us. Okay, the halacha is as follows. Okay, if a person redeems his own Maaser Sheni with money, the Torah tells us that he has to pay the fair value of the Maser Sheni plus a Chomesh plus a fifth. That's what the Torah says, halacha. My Maser Sheni money, my Maser Sheni produce is worth $100. I'm going to redeem it so that I can go to Yerushalayim. I have to pay $120 to redeem that money. Now, what am I doing with that 120? It's still mine, but I have to go to Yerushalayim and buy 120 worth instead of 100. In other words, Maser Sheni can't lose out. Maser Sheni is really you. You are the Maser Sheni because you're going to eat it. It's not, you're not giving it away to somebody else. But the halacha is that you have to pay a chomesh, an extra fifth, to redeem your own Maser Sheni. However, if someone redeems your Maser Sheni for you, meaning you'll go to someone else and someone else pays the money to redeem the Maser Sheni, which is pretty much what we've been talking about in a number of these cases, there is no inyan of chomesh. There's no extra 20% that has to be paid. It's dollar for dollar. It's worth $100. You pay $100. You take the $100 and you go up to Yerushalayim and you cash it in for produce. Now,
Rabbi, can you clarify something? When you say redeem your own Maser Sheni, you can bring your own Maser Sheni up to Yerushalayim for no chomesh, with no additional amount. You can bring the physical Maser Sheni
absolutely.
up there if it comes there. So this is only if you redeem your Maser Sheni and then you buy it back, and then you buy it back.
No, you have a field of stuff. You don't want to schlep a tenth of it to Yerushalayim.
Right.
So you know what? I'm going to be in Yerushalayim only a couple of weeks. I need to eat all year here. So you say, you know what? I've got $100, I've got $1,000 worth of produce in my field. So 10% is Maser Sheni. I'm going to take $100 and redeem the Maser Sheni with it. Either 100 or 120, depending on the situation here. Right. So it'll be 100 or 120, depending on these other factors that you're getting into. And then you can eat all the produce locally.
I got it.
Or sell it or anything. But now that 100 or 120 you're taking to Yerushalayim to spend on food in Yerushalayim.
Yeah, because you've redeemed it yourself. Because you've redeemed it yourself. So now, here's the chap. This is what is interesting. Says the Torah, because of the pasuk, there's a pasuk in Devarim that actually says Ki yivarecha Hashem Elokecha in Parshas Re'eh, because Hashem will bless you, that you will have so much produce that you will have to redeem it to take it up to Eretz Yisrael. So we learn from that pasuk that you are allowed to do a ha'arama. You're allowed to do a sleight of hand. In other words, you can do something that you might say, that's not totally kosher, in order not to have to pay the chomesh. What can you do? You can let someone else redeem the produce, and they don't have to pay the chomesh. What does it have to do with you? Says, so then the halacha is that if I take my produce and somehow gift it or give it to somebody else, and that somebody else redeems it, there's no chomesh. You understand? In other words, as long as I myself am not redeeming my own produce, anybody else redeeming it doesn't pay the extra fifth, the 20%, and I'm allowed to do a sort of a sleight of hand and make sure that it's not me, but someone else who's redeeming it.
So we have you and I have, Rabbi, have two fields side by side, and they're each an acre, and they each produce the same amount of wheat. We harvest on the same day because it all ripens around the same time. And I bring my truck of stuff over to you, and or tractor full of stuff over to you. You bring yours over to me. We've now swapped, and now we're out of it.
That's a perfect example of what we're talking about. But now there are two options to do this. There's two ways to do this. One is to actually transfer the goods, the crop, and the other, listen to this, I'm going to give you the money to pay me back for my fruit. In other words, I can give you money, the matana, and you buy my fruit and there's no chomesh, or I can give you the actual fruit and there's no chomesh. So the Gemara says, actually the Mishnah there, Maser Sheni, that of the two, it's less obvious, let's say. If you give him the money and not the fruit, because you give him the fruit, everybody sees you're giving him the fruit and he's giving you back the fruit. It's okay, but it's like it's out there. If you give him the money, then kind of nobody really knows that, and the guy comes with the money and redeems your fruit, then that's a little bit better. But it doesn't matter, says the Mishnah there. You can do it either way, but one is a little bit better than the other.
So Rabbi, doesn't that make a sham of
okay, right. That's the obvious question. Is, doesn't this look like a real? What are we doing here? But remember, the pasuk and the pasuk says, "Ki yivarecha Hashem elokecha." Hashem will bless you with an abundance of fruit, of which you have to give Masa Sheni. So the abundance Shalom has blessed you with all of this fruit. So say Chazal, L'chein hikilu bo chachamim. Because of this pasuk, the rabbis have been makel laharim olav to sort of do a laharim is a deceit, if you will, or a sleight of hand. L'fdoso b'li chomesh. The Torah doesn't necessarily want your chomesh. They don't want to penalize you that you have to tack on an extra 20% of your own produce to go to Yerushalayim, because it's not going to the Kohen, it's not going to the Levi, it's you yourself. So it's a very nice thing to go to Eretz Yisrael and spend that extra 20% on food in Eretz Yisrael, because you're buying food in Yerushalayim. Someone is going to get the benefit of it because you're spending more money. That's all fine and good. But the Torah doesn't want to penalize you and say you have to do that. So the Torah says, you know what? If someone else is going to do the redemption, you're fine. So get someone else to do it. In other words, we're telling you right at the get-go, get someone else to redeem it for you, and you won't have to pay the chomesh. So even though, Michael, yes, you're going to say, oh, but isn't this trickery? It's trickery that the Chazal say, we don't want to penalize you, so we're going to allow you to do a little trickery. We're going to allow you to do a little trickery, and we're going to allow you to say, you know what, let the other guy do the exchange, and you're off the hook as long as you don't do it yourself. That's the reality. I mean, it may not be something you like to hear, but sof kol sof, the Chachamim say it's a completely legitimate way of redeeming Masa Sheni is by letting somebody else do it, not you. Now, before you let me clarify something. There's an interesting machlokes there between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to whether or not you are allowed to transfer Masa Sheni. So we're going to get into this just a little bit so you understand the machlokes. There's two ways of looking at that of that transfer. So Reb Meir, who's more machmir, says you're not allowed to transfer Masa Sheni. If it's already Masa Sheni, you can't transfer it to your friend to redeem. Rabbi Yehuda says yes. So what do you have to do? According to Reb Meir, you have to transfer it before you took the Masa Sheni. In other words, it's still tevel. It's still uncircumcised, unredeemed produce sitting on the ground. You take the Masa Sheni, that tevel, in other words, it's not kodesh. You transfer it to your friend, and your friend is the one who's going to give you the money for the Masa Sheni. So according to Reb Meir, that's okay. Rabbi Yehuda goes a step further and says, even if you've already redeemed it and it's Masa Sheni, you can still transfer the Masa Sheni produce to your friend or even your child, okay? In other words, you can, not a cotton, but a gadol, because a cotton is the same as you. You can't transfer it to a cotton that's transferring it from one pocket to another, because a cotton doesn't have any of his own rights. But if you transfer it to your bar mitzvah boy, and say, here is the fruit, now go ahead and redeem it for me, he's allowed to redeem it for you, and there's no chomesh. So that's the only machlokes between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, is whether or not you can actually transfer what we will call circumcised product, meaning it's already Masa Sheni, as opposed to tevel, which is not yet given Masa Sheni. But that machlokes aside, just to say that's the machlokes, you're allowed to unabashedly transfer either the produce or give somebody money for the purpose of redeeming the produce. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, even though on the face of it, it is a harama. It is a sort of a sleight of hand. You're allowed to do it because the Torah doesn't want to penalize you and make you pay an extra chomesh for your own produce. Now, and Michael, you may have a little concern with that. I think because you're going to say, well, why would the Torah allow you to do that? And again, it goes back to that pasuk in the Torah, which the Chachamim are saying that if God has blessed you with an abundance of food, then somehow you should be able to enjoy that food and go to Yerushalayim with Maser Sheni, but not burden you with having to pay extra for your largesse. Rabbi Hashem gave you a nice harvest. Okay, take that harvest and go to Yerushalayim, Maser Sheni. You're still going to be spending a lot of money because you have a big harvest, and Maser Sheni at a minimum has to be Maser. So you're going to certainly bring a lot of money into circulation in Yerushalayim. Okay, we forgive you. You don't have to pay another 20% for your efforts. That's how the Chachamim interpret that pasuk and say you've been blessed. Bring what you got and don't have to be penalized. And the way to do that is you have to do this harama, you have to do this sleight of hand and make sure that someone else is redeeming, not you.
Rabbi, can you just clarify one thing on the last point? And that is, how aren't you supposed to designate Maser Sheni? How can you transfer Tevel and it becomes Maser Sheni under Rabbi Meir's?
Okay. So when you have Tevel, then there is nothing that's designated as Maser Sheni. Anything on that field can be Maser Sheni. There isn't a specific corner or portion like Peah or Shikha or whatever. There isn't a specific part of the produce that's Maser Sheni. Anything on that field can be Maser Sheni. So when you transfer a uncircumcised portion of the land to somebody else, then randomly you're saying that's the Maser Sheni. You can do that because there is no specific dedication to Maser Sheni.
But you're making an agreement to transfer it back as part of that. So in essence, you are part of the designation of it as Maser Sheni. So it's really not Tevel because it's linked to this overall transaction.
But in the form that you're transferring it, it's Tevel. In other words, I can say I'm giving this portion of the property. I can say I'm giving this portion of the property. I can take anything in my whole property and say this is what I want to dedicate to Maser Sheni. It doesn't matter.
But at that point, you're not doing that. You're not dedicating that. You're transferring it over as Tevel. It's not Maser Sheni until the exchange or the sale happens, and then that person is designated.
That's right, and that's allowed. That person.
But then you have not. You haven't reached your obligation to designate Maser Sheni.
No. But Michael, I don't have an obligation to designate a portion of my land as Maser Sheni. There's no such obligation that I have to pick the portion of the land that's Maser Sheni. The only thing that's important is that at the end of the day, there is a portion of land that's Maser Sheni, regardless of whether I picked it or someone else picked it. It doesn't matter. That's the point. It's random.
So by acquiring it back, you have your Maser Sheni.
That's correct.
It's not the land; it's what you have to take up to you.
That's correct. So if the guy you gave the money to comes back and says, "Okay, here it is. I want to redeem your Maser Sheni," then the portion that's Maser Sheni can be anything on that land. There is nothing that says it has to be this portion or that portion or that portion. As long as it is an appropriate amount, Maser, a tenth. As long as it is an appropriate amount, it can be any portion of the land that becomes dedicated randomly. So we don't have that problem. But again, in the order of priorities, says the Mishnah in Maser Sheni, it's better that you give him the money and let him pay for the Maser Sheni instead of giving him a gift of the land. In other words, you can, but it's better to give him the money and let him redeem it rather than dedicating the actual Maser Sheni itself. Okay, that much we'll concede. The Mishnah says it's better to do it. not absolute necessary, but it's better to do it. So now let's get back to our scenario. So that's the background by which we're working here in this Gemara. So Rav Papa made his statement. Frek the Gemara Akasha. A person is standing on the threshing floor, he's threshing the fruit, and he has no money. Why does he have no money? Because he wants to transfer money to his friend to buy the Maser Sheni, right? That's what we've concluded, that he wants to give his friend money, and that friend is then going to buy the Maser Sheni. And Rashi clarifies that's why you do it with a good friend, because he isn't going to walk away with the money. He's going to take the money and actually fulfill the purchase of the Maser Sheni. So that's just an interesting aside, is that you don't want to give it to a random person because you're going to say, oh, thanks for the money, and walk away. No, you give it to someone who's a friend who you know is going to redeem the Maser Sheni. So what does he do? Omer l'chavero, the person who owns the produce and is on the threshing floor, he says to his friend, I am giving you this fruit for matana. Remember, that's one of the two ways of being able to transfer Maser Sheni. You can transfer the food or transfer money. He has no money with him, but he has a threshing floor full of fruit. So he tells his friend, this fruit I'm giving you b'matana. I'm giving it to you for a gift, right? And memvava menalef v'chozav omar harahei mechalan almos sheyesh lo babayis. So and what's the second half of that equation? I'm going to redeem or make whole, or I'm going to make it not holy with money that I have in my house. So here's the scenario. I'm on the threshing floor. I've got plenty of fruit of which I have to take Maser Sheni, but I have no money. So instead of giving my friend money, which we've just concluded is the better way to do it, you want to give him money and let him redeem. I don't have money. So I'm going to give you the actual fruit, which is okay. You're allowed to do it. I'm going to give you the fruit. And what are you going to do? I'm then going to tell you, the money that I have in my house, back in the house, that's going to be the money that is going to be used to make chol, or to deconsecrate the fruit. So now this fruit that I'm giving you is going to become chol. The money will become kodesh, and I'm going to take that money and go to Yerushalayim.
All right. Well, when he's giving, so to speak, because he's not physically transferring it, it sounds like, giving this produce to the other guy to then do this exchange, is he giving him the entire field's worth or only 10%?
Only 10%.
So he's literally giving away the Maser Sheni, which I guess.
Remember, in the machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can do that. You can't do it according to Rabbi if it's already
right. So let's take a different situation. If I actually wanted to, you tell me you're going up to Yerushalayim next week and you're going to be there for a month, and you didn't get so much out of your own field, but you've got a big truck, I could gift you my Maser Sheni literally for you to take Yerushalayim and eat.
Correct.
Okay, only instead of that, so this is a corollary to that, which is I'm gifting it to you with the understanding you're gonna redeem it and then gift me the money.
Correct. My
Okay.
own money, right? My own money, which I'm giving you as a gift. I'm giving you the money as a gift, right? In other words, the friend.
No, I thought he's giving him the grain. He's giving him the grain that's the produce that's the Maser Sheni as a gift.
The grain, and he's saying that the money that I have back in the house, I'm going to exchange for the grain. I'm going to exchange for the grain. So the friend isn't any better off than he was before.
Right.
I myself am now going to have money to take to Yerushalayim and fruit that I can eat here.
No. So are there?
The friend doesn't.
I'm gifting the grain, I'm gifting the money, and then he's gifting money back to me, or am I, or how many gifts are going back and forth here?
Okay, so the gift is of the produce, but what he's saying is that the money that I have back in the house, that is going to be the money that my money that I have back in the house, I'm going to buy back the fruit I just gifted you so that I can eat that fruit here in my
Okay.
backyard and take my money to Yerushalayim. So the owner of the fruit is doing the whole thing, but he's using his friend as the conduit without having to pay the chomesh. The whole point is he doesn't want to pay chomesh. But so if he redeemed it of his own money, he has to pay a chomesh. By gifting the fruit to the other guy, it's no longer his. So now he's redeeming the friend's fruit with the money that he's going to use to go to Yerushalayim and get the fruit back so that he can eat it here in Chutz La'aretz.
As opposed to giving the friend the money who then redeems what's now his own produce,
That's
his,
correct.
and then giving the money back. So the
Right.
money, so I'm redeeming now somebody else's produce.
That's correct. And
Okay.
that produce that is somebody else's is what I gifted him. That's the harama. That's the whole sort of sleight of hand here, is that it's all me, but it's all me to avoid the chomesh, to avoid the extra 20%. I'm giving you the fruit, I'm buying back the fruit, you're just my conduit to allow it to happen, right? And the Gemara and the Torah says that's okay. Because
All right. Somehow I have a feeling that if somebody tried something like this with the IRS and the federal taxes, it wouldn't work.
Well, again, the IRS, I mean, they're looking at it not from the perspective of Kodesh, but again, sometimes we have difficulty when we look at things that don't seem to be totally on the up and up, but yet, I mean, Mechiras Chametz is an example. There are other examples where we see what looks like, for instance, a heter iska. A heter iska, when I'm lending somebody money and collecting interest, but I have a heter iska, there's no interest. It's done completely legitimately, but someone on the outside looking in is, but you're still collecting interest. You're still over the lav. The answer is no, because the way I'm doing it, we're not calling it interest. You're going to say, but that's just verbiage. But the halacha allows you to do certain things, and that's in the case of Mekach HaMemker. In order for there to be commerce, we allow you to collect.
Okay,
interest,
but
not
there's a
calling it
difference. When it comes to the heter iska, when it comes to Mechiras Chametz, we have relatively complex. The truth is, it could be boiled down probably to a few lines, but there's a written contract
Right.
that says this is what we're doing. This is something where, hey, Joe, can you help me out here? And it's all done totally verbally. And
No, but you can do a bishtar, Menashe.
you could, but it sounds like you could do this without a star.
You could do it without a star too. But, and you're going to see Rashi says it has to be a trusted friend. It has to be someone who isn't going to double cross you and say, thank you very much. I'm going my way. I got your produce. I don't have to do anything with you. So let's look at the Rashi. Rashi says it has to be a good friend who will allow you to complete the harama, as it were, to complete the transaction by fulfilling the other half of it, which is that I'm going to allow you to redeem it now. So you know what? Maybe for his trouble, he'll give him a present. He'll give him a couple bushels of fruit or something as a gift. Once everything is already mastered and he owns the whole thing.
Well, then we get to ribbis issues.
Well, I'll invite you for dinner and everything else. All right, again, as long as we avoid ribbis, we'll be okay. But the point of the matter is that we sometimes feel a little bit odd here that the Torah is allowing us to do something that maybe isn't 100% kosher. So we have to go out of our way to explain that the pasuk in the Torah that says you can do it, the Chazal say that the whole point of that pasuk was that Rabbi Shalom blessed you, Yivarecha Hashem Elokecha, with all this produce, so that you're bringing so much money, as it were, to Yerushalayim. We're not going to tell you bring a little bit more because you're already bringing so much. God blessed you. So why should we make it more difficult on you? We're going to say you're allowed to do this and still bring a pot of gold to Yerushalayim. But remember, the whole point of it is that the people in Yerushalayim are going to benefit because you're bringing all this money to buy their produce. Who's buying the produce that's in Yerushalayim? There's plenty of produce there that has to be sold. So when they come up for Shalosh Regalim or just to redeem the Maser Sheni on those years when Maser Sheni is appropriate, it's a benefit to the people of Yerushalayim because they're now able to sell their produce. So anyway, so let's take a look at Rashi, because Rashi So, okay, ve'ein biyodo mos, all right, he has no money, says Rashi, v'rotze l'chalal masa shalo, and he wants to be machalel, he wants to make chol his maser, ve'herim, and he deceits, he does a deceit, b'pidyono, with his pigeon, l'chalo, al yidei mekach u'memker, shemocho le'ish acher, he sells it to somebody else, kadeshli is chayev chomesh, so that there should be no chomesh, because someone else is going to redeem it. Tiksiv, it says in the pasuk, im goal yigal ish mimasro chamishaso yosef mimasro. It says if a person is going to redeem his own maser mimasro, the person is going to. This is a different pasuk in Vayikra. If a person is going to redeem his own maser chamishaso yosef mimasro, then he has to add a fifth to his own maser, v'lo halokeach maser sheni shel acherim, but not if he buys maser sheni of somebody else. So in other words, the Torah says specifically, on your own maser, you have to give a fifth. On someone else's maser, you don't have to give a fifth. That's why this whole harama comes into being, because we're going to make it that someone else is going to redeem the maser. Omar l'chavero, says Rashi, Shu ohavo. Here's the key word: his friend who he loves. What does it mean, who he loves? Meaning someone who's going to go along with it and is not going to double cross him. That's what this whole thing means. So if he says to his friend Shu ohavo, who he loves, meaning a true friend, the yadea bo she'eino oseh elo lahafta min hachomesh, and he knows that the whole transaction is just to avoid the chomesh, so he isn't going to double cross him, right? That's the point. Haripeiros halalu shel maser sheni. This peiros of maser sheni, nostun l'cho b'matana, I'm giving it to you as a gift. Mekivin shekoden zeh b'matana, and since you're acquiring it through a matana, nas harishan nachri eitzlam. The nachri doesn't mean a goy; it means a stranger. So the owner of the fruit now becomes a stranger to this fruit. Why? Because he's given it away to a matana. So now that he is no longer the owner, he's a stranger. He can go and get his own fruit back without a chomesh. That's the harama. That's the actual harama here, is that we're going to allow him to do this. Okay, so again, it's legitimate, and the Torah says you can do it. Now, so the Rashi on Memvav Medalef, the top Rashi, the Chosev Omer, and the owner comes back and says, "How repayers shall maser sheni shalachi you mecholelin." This pay is now yours because I gave it to you. I'm mechalel amos yeshli babayis. I have money in my house. I'm going to be mechalel v'yikna hamasa hazeh, and I'm going to acquire this masa as amos v'yotzel l'chulin. And so this mos now will become chulin, and I can eat it. I can share it with you. I can eat it, and the money that I'm going to pay for it, that I'm going to be using to redeem, that's the money I'm taking to Yerushalayim in order to buy the produce in Eretz Yisrael. So this whole harama, this whole sort of back and forth, is for the purpose of taking the produce, making it chol, making it not kodesh, taking the money and going to Eretz Yisrael, and not having to pay a chomesh. That's the whole point of this whole Gemara. Okay, we haven't hit, the punchline is it's going to be a kasha and a papa. We haven't gotten there yet. But that's the background that we now understand how this whole system works with what's called a harama, that you're allowed to sort of sleight of hand redeem maser sheni without the chomesh. Fine. That's what that Gemara, that Mishnah maser sheni. Right. Correct the Gemara now. Okay, so where are we? Okay. So let's go back here on the Gemara on top of Memvav and Medalos. Tama de ein biyodo mos. The only reason why he does this whole thing is why? Because he has no money. So he has to go through this whole sort of back and forth in order to redeem. Or in yesh biyodo mos. But let's say he has money in his pocket sitting on the threshing floor. Then likna lehu idach b'meshicha uparik. The hacha adif, then it's better that he gives him the money and the guy redeems right away. In other words, what did we say before? There's two ways of doing it. I can do it by giving him a matana, or I can do it by giving him money. What did the Gemara? What did the in Maser Sheni? It says it's better to do it by giving him money and letting him redeem it rather than giving him the gift of the produce, which is, it's okay, but it's in your face. In other words, someone watching the whole thing, what's a little bit less onerous? Giving him the produce and watching the produce go back and forth, or giving him money and the other guy takes the money and buys the produce back from him. Says the Gemara there, it's better to do it with the money rather than with the produce. So the Gemara here says the only reason why he has to give him the produce because he has no money on him, because he's down on the threshing floor with no money. But the Gemara is concluding that if he had money, it would be better to do it that way. Okay, now we're going to go ahead. Menashe, you have a question?
Sorry, getting a little bit clearer. So it seems then I was confused about before. Person A wants to help person B. They can redeem. Person A can redeem person B's Meiser Sheni, even when person B still owns the Meiser Sheni.
No.
No.
The reason, okay, what's happening here is person A owns a Master Sheni, and
Okay.
he's now saying, if I'm going to redeem my own Master Sheni, I have to pay a chomesh.
Right.
So he goes to person B, his good friend, and says, do me a favor. I'm gifting you a portion of my field, whether it's pre Master Sheni, not Master Sheni. That's totally on the machlokes with Meir Rabbi Yehuda. Forget about that. I'm giving you the Master Sheni. I have money back at the house. I'm going to redeem what I just gave you so that I'm able to get my
right. So now I'm redeeming my own Meiser Sheni, but I'm not really redeeming. I'm redeeming the other guy's Meiser Sheni
which
that
I gave him as a gift, right?
But I'm using my money to do it. I'm not gifting him the money. I'm using my money to redeem somebody else's. So then there's another circumstance that I've got money in my pocket and my produce is sitting here. I'm giving the other guy the money.
The money, right?
And he's redeeming the Meiser Sheni, which is still my Meiser Sheni at the moment.
Exactly right.
Okay, so getting back to what I was saying before, you're allowed to redeem, I mean, obviously with permission and all, but you're allowed to redeem somebody else's Meiser Sheni.
That's 100% correct.
Okay, so then let me think about it this way. Option number one, I don't have money in my hand. The produce is sitting here. I gift you the Meiser Sheni or all the field, including whatever it is, but I'm gifting you the produce. And then now I no longer own that. I now, with my own money, redeem the Meiser Sheni. So the money still is in my hand. On the other hand, if I don't have the money in my hand, the money's sitting in my house, I give you the produce, and now I sort of remotely redeem your produce with my money. And now again, my money's sitting in my hand.
Right.
But in that first situation, the produce is now my friend's, and so the first situation, I gave you the produce and I redeemed it. I've got the money that I'm going to take up to Yerushalayim. You've got my produce. In the second situation, I've gifted you the money. So now technically you've got the money and I've still got the produce.
Right. But the outcome will be the same in both.
But either way, then sounds like we have to have another gift back, or else I'm not going to be made whole.
That's correct. So
either way, there's going to have to be two gifts.
Right, but the outcome will be that there'll be no chomesh, right? So in the scenarios you're posing, scenario one, I gift fruit. Scenario two, I gift money. The Mishnah says in Maser Sheni, it's better to gift money than to gift fruit. So
right, but in both cases, my trusted friend has to now gift back that either the money or the fruit, depending on the situation. No,
not gift back, buy back. I know it means gift back, but he's going to buy it back, because one way or the other, if he has the money, then he is going to return the money for the gift, for the fruit. In either the terminology, yes, it's less important whether you call it a gift or a buyback. But when the dust clears, the person who originally had the fruit, now has fruit and money. He has fruit which has been mastered, so he can eat it in his backyard, and he has money to go to Yerushalayim, because one way or the other, he's made this harama, he's made this sleight of hand that allows him to take his money to Yerushalayim, eat his fruit, and not pay a chomesh.
Right, but really, it's really, in the end, it sounds like in both these scenarios, it's really the owner of the fields, produce originally and money originally.
Correct.
One of them was gifted to his trusted friend. He then does this thing to handle the redemption, and the trusted friend now at this point either has the fruit or has the money, and if there isn't a buyer, it has to be a gift back, or
But
else.
it's, as you laid out before, Menashe, it has to be both ways to
Right.
make it an even exchange.
Right. So there has to be two gifts, because if it's a buyback after the Meiser Sheni transaction, then there'd have to be something else than just flipping hands, and it's not. The only way you can counteract a gift is another gift.
Right. So okay. So what upshot is there something troubling you here? I mean, I'm trying to understand.
Well, you
Well, the
only
whole thing
told,
troubles me, but
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
but
No.
you told half the side. In other words, when you say a trusted friend, if you want to make sure that you're getting back what you have,
Right.
your friend has to do the exact same thing parallel to you
Correct.
to mirror that, so that you both end up in the same place.
right, a
correct.
gift that mirrors the gift.
Correct. It has to be done so that at the end of the day, the friend knows what he's doing is helping you out from the chomesh, but you're going to get back your produce, you're going to get back your money, and whatever you want to do something later with him, that's perfectly fine. But at this point, he doesn't have to pay the chomesh in order to redeem his own Maser Sheni, because it's your Maser Sheni. It's your Maser Sheni. I gave it to you. The produce is yours. I'm buying back yours, not mine. So in your mind, that's what you have to be thinking about, even though it is a sleight of hand of what he's doing, but it's a permissible sleight of hand, says the Torah, because of the circumstance. So you're allowed to do it, except that it's better in the order of priorities. It's better to gift him money, not gift him the fruit. You have to give him the fruit, fine, but it's better to gift him money. Okay.
But Rabbi, I'm sorry. Here's
Go
what
ahead, go ahead.
bothers me about you said, because the pasuk says, and God will
Yivarech
grant you
Hashem, right? Yivarech
the
Hashem.
ability. What about those who don't have that, who have not been granted that zechus to have that? So they can't do this to be able to eat Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim.
Once it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Once a person who has been blessed with an abundance can do it, then even someone who doesn't have an abundance but has just enough can also do it. In other words, we're not saying you have to have a truckload of fruit to be able to bring. Even if you're a small landowner with a limited budget and a limited amount of fruit, you are now included in this harama. You're included in this sort of sleight of hand, and you can do the same thing with your friend that the rich guy can do with his friend.
But the problem is that the chomesh in the first scenario you described wasn't a big hardship on them. So they may not, the people with lesser may not be able to make that exchange. I still don't understand the requirement of the chomesh and the workaround, because
the chomesh, Michael, applies to the rich and the poor alike. Whether you're rich, whether you're poor, if you redeem your own produce, you have to pay a chomesh. If you're poor, if you're less rich, and you have a smaller amount to redeem, the chomesh is smaller, because 20% of $100 is less than 20% of $1,000, of course. So once we allow one person to do it, we allow everybody to do it, because no matter what, Maser Sheni is a bracha. It doesn't matter if you have less than somebody else; it's still a bracha that God bestows upon you and makes you go to Yerushalayim and bring your own produce as Maser Sheni. It's a mitzvah. So the Torah says if you're redeeming your own, you've got to add a 20%. And of course, it's going to be a harsher reality on the less rich guy than on the rich guy. So there's no reason why he can't do the harama with his trusted friend and not have to pay the chomesh on $100 as opposed to 1,000. It doesn't matter. I mean, in other words, the amount of the chomesh is not relevant to the
I get it, but it's still less likely that someone who's poor would have a trusted friend.
Why? If I'm a poorer guy and I got a good friend like you, Michael, you'll do it for me, whether I have $100 or $1,000, because you're helping me out.
The thing is,
helping
if you happen to have a farm, in the example you have it readily. There are a lot of poor people who don't have farms, so where are they going to get their produce? They're going to have to buy it. I mean, it's
Remember, someone who doesn't have land and produce is patur from Masasheni. Masasheni is only a condition on someone who has land and has produce. If
so
I
had forgotten that. So that means you don't have to redeem it if you don't have land.
Correct. You only have to redeem if, again, it was an agrarian society, so the assumption was that everybody had some land. But if for some reason somebody didn't have land, remember, the Shvatim all got land, so everybody has some land. In theory, everybody in Klal Yisrael owns Dalet Amos or something.
That makes more sense.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So again, we're talking about in the normal course. If someone doesn't have the land, he's not Mechayev Masasheni. But we're talking on the okay. So now let's get to the punchline. So the punchline. So we're saying that that the only reason why he has to do this is because he has money somewhere else, right? Okay, so let's go back. So Tama, the reason why he does this, because he has no money with him on the threshing floor, so he does this. Or if he has money in his pocket to buy, the Hachi Odif, says the Gemara. Why? Because it's better, like we said, it's better that he gives him money. The Havale Nachri, because he's a stranger. Now, the Omid Matbeya Nasa Chalipin, here's the punchline. If you're going to say, according to Rav Papa, that a coin is something that can be exchanged for an item in Chalipin, Nikdele Mos Laheich Agav Sudar, Belifruk. Then why do we go through this whole charade and say, oh, he doesn't have money, so he has to give him produce, and then the produce is redeemed? Let him exchange the money with a handkerchief, and therefore he will be able to have the money as if it's here. It could be in his house, but it'll be here because he did an exchange, and you can exchange a sudar, a handkerchief, for money. So it's as if he has the money. And since transaction money is better than transaction fruit, let him do it that way. And this way, the whole harama will happen. It will happen the way we want it, with money, not with fruit, and everybody will be fine. So the kasha is, you, Rav Papa, are saying that you're allowed to use an exchange, and money being one of the two items. Why doesn't the Mishnah over there say, even though the money is not here with him on the threshing floor, let him make a kinyan sudar as if it's on the threshing floor, give the guy the money, and the friend will buy back the produce instead of giving him the produce. That's the Gemara's kasha. So it's a kasha on Rav Papa. If we're not doing this way, it's for some reason because you cannot take money as one of the items of Chalipin. That should be the proof that you can't, and that's a kasha on Rav Papa, right? I mean, does that make sense?
Rabbi, didn't you say before last week that a kinyan could only be done in a sale, not an exchange? So I don't understand how that's allowed in an exchange transaction, that he uses a handkerchief to make a kinyan to be paid later. I thought an exchange had to be right then and there.
No, that's the point. If you're going to take a sudar and exchange it for money, then that transaction is that right then there is a transaction. It's not an obligation. It's an exact transaction. You get the sudar, I get the money, and now I'm the friend. I'm going to take the money and buy the produce. So in other words, this transaction is going to happen immediately on the threshing floor, even though he doesn't have money with him, because he's going to exchange the suitor for the money so that the friend has the money, not the produce. He has the money immediately and he can redeem the fruit for the original owner. That should be the way it should be done, says the Gemara, if you're going to hold that money can be exchanged. In the exchange, money can be the object of chalipin. But since the Gemara doesn't say that, the Gemara says, no, he's got to give him the fruit, and then later on he's going to take the money. That shows that you cannot exchange an object for money, because why not do it the right way? But by not doing it the right way, you're showing that you can't do it. That's the whole kasha here, right? I hope that's clear. In other words, the fact that he's not doing what Rav Papa wants him to do shows that you can't do it. All right? So now Rashi says, Tamad ein biyado mos, says Rashi, the reason why he can't do it because he doesn't have money, the miktani de ein biyado mos, shma mino, we learn, okay, we extrapolate that if he had money, begorin, right there on the threshing floor, he doesn't have to say you have to agree. The whole transaction could have happened there and then because he gave him the money, and the friend takes the money and exchanges it for the fruit, right? So you don't have to go through the less attractive way of gifting him the fruit. You gift him the money through chalipin, and then he goes ahead and buys it back. But the Gemara doesn't say that. By not saying it, it shows that Rav Papa isn't correct, that you cannot use money to exchange for chalipin, because that should have been the better way to do it. That's the real kasha here on Rav Papa. Okay, so that's really a beautiful kasha. So the Gemara wants to give an answer. What does the Gemara say? The lesle sudder. All right, that's kind of like backing into it. He says, you know why it didn't happen? Because he didn't have a sudder. So he didn't have a sudder, he couldn't make the exchange. Correct the Gemara, v'nikna nale agav karka. You remember in previous Gemaras, we learned something what's called the kinyan agav. A kinyan agav is when a person transacts land, and in the course of transacting the land, he also transacts an exchange of metaltal, of movables. In other words, I want to give you something, but there's no way that I can give it to you because I don't have it here with me. It's in my house a mile away, but I have property, karka. So I'm going to do a kinyan of karka, and it's called agav. On the back of the karka, I'm going to transfer that metaltalim. And that's a legitimate way of giving you metaltalim by a kinyan agav. We had this Gemara before. It's in various different Gemaras. So that's so Frank the Gemara, the Niktanala Agav. In other words, he's standing on the threshing floor. That's property. Let him give it a part of the threshing. Let him say, you know what? I'm giving you a portion of this threshing floor as a gift, and on top of that, the money that I have in my house, I'm giving to you. So, in other words, I'm giving you money. Again, this is all to avoid the more obvious way of giving a matana of fruit is I want to give you money. How can I give you money? I can give you money either through chalipin. No, says the Gemara, no chalipin. Then let me do it through kinyan agav. I'll give you, I'll gift you a portion of my threshing floor, and then with that will be the money which you will redeem the fruit. And for the Gemara, the lesle karka, that he has no karka. What does that mean? Rashi will say he doesn't own the threshing floor. He borrowed it. He's renting it or whatever. So in other words, he doesn't own the threshing floor to do a kinyan agav. Frek the Gemara ve'ichbel tana lashmin and gavra irtale de lesle v'lo kolum. Is the Gemara telling us that this is a transaction where you have a naked person who owns no metaltalin, he owns no karka, he's standing on the threshing floor and he owns nothing. So there's no way that he can transfer the money to him. He has to transfer only produce which is in front of him. That's absurd, says the Gemara. We can't be talking about a guy who's naked and doesn't own anything. Therefore, the bottom line is that matbeya cannot be the object of chalipin. In other words, this is a a shluga of Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, no, we can use money as one of the two barter items in Chalipin. This whole section dealing with the Goren tells us that no, you cannot do that because it's not appropriate to money cannot be in the transaction. It's got to be an item, fruit, and he in this case, unlike Rab Nachman who says money is fruit, you can't hold like that. So let's look at Rashi. The hacha adif she'ena niras aroma kolkach lehiftim in a chomish. That's what we've been saying, that we prefer to exchange, to give him the money, not the actual fruit. The havalei chavera nochra, he's a stranger, legabe masa, the karina be mimasro parat shalacherim. And again, the Gemara is saying that you can only do this with somebody else, but still it's better to give him money and not produce. So, frek the Gemara, nikta nale agav karka, says Rashi, yitin lo zeh bal hamasa karka b'chazaka, he should give him land, and with it, agav, he'll give him the money. Once you transfer, he was thinking to give him a portion of the threshing floor, then it doesn't matter if the money is somewhere else. Kinyan agav allows him to transfer the money. And again, it's better to transfer money and not produce. The Tanan, it says in the Gemara there in Kedushin, meaning metaltalin, niknin in the chosim sheyesh lo achrayis. The chosim that have achrayis is considered karka, so you can transfer the chosim she'ein laham achrayis, which means metaltalin, with the chosim that have achrayis, meaning karka. Bekesef, b'shtar, b'chazaka. The chaver is a yomer hareperes halalu mekulolim almos, and then the friend will come. Okay, I'm exchanging these pears with the money and making it a chol sheyesh lach b'beisecha, which you have in your house. The hochri odif. Remember, that's odif the havalei nochra because he's a stranger. V'hach kushel rapapa lo makshinin ela misnisin ka mitama misnisin. So the Gemara is saying that this question of agav isn't only a question on Rav Papa. It's a question on Rav Papa, but it's also a more generic kasha. Why don't you use kinyan agav to make money go from one hand to the other? Use a kinyan agav. So the Gemara answers because he doesn't own the threshing floor, therefore he can't do it with agav. Then the Gemara asks, Ich biltana, this asek hatana v'torach lahoros loma halacha b'davar she'ein mitsuya. Is the Gemara telling us a case that is very rare? Shahaya Adam Omid Begorin Orom, a person is standing in the Gorin, in the threshing floor, totally naked, because he doesn't own anything. He doesn't have metaltalin, he doesn't have karka. What's he doing on the threshing floor naked? In other words, it's a metaphor. Ella Suda Yeshlo, so he must have some handkerchief. In other words, he doesn't even have a stitch of clothing because you are allowed to use borrowed clothing. If you're wearing somebody else's clothes and you want to use that as a sudar, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to make a sudar even with borrowed clothing. So you're literally telling me he's standing there naked, doesn't have any clothing on, doesn't own the threshing floor, can't make a transaction. He has to give him the fruit instead of the money. Because remember, the money is the better choice here. So so in the extreme, okay, so fine, so he gives him the peiros, but the proof here is that no matter how you slice it, you can't use the money for chalipin, and that's the kasha on Rav Papa. Says the Gemara, it's a raya from here that money cannot be used as part of the barter. And therefore, no matter how you slice it, he has to give him the fruit for the exchange because he can't give him any money because money is not allowed to be part of a chalipin transaction. That's how the Gemara concludes as of now. This is how we're going to leave it. But Shema Mina, that's a proof. But it's a fascinating study here in A, the halacha of chalipin, B, the halacha of Masa Sheni, that we've learned something tremendous today, that not only are you allowed to do a harama? But there's two ways of doing the harama, either through fruit and through money. Better to do it through money than fruit, but you're allowed to do it through fruit. So you give him the fruit, and then later you give him the money, and he does the exchange. But you're not allowed to transfer money in chalipin in order to buy the fruit. That's the bottom line, which is negea to our Gemara, which what we're learning is that, so now according to most Manda Amrim, we say, you can't use money as a exchange commodity, as a change mechanism, and you can't use money as the commodity that you're going to exchange the kli, what we call the noal, the shoe. So money is literally taboo in a chalipin exchange. Money is only good in a domim exchange, when you want to buy something, but not in an exchange. You have to use something other than money. That's how the Gemara leaves it right now, which again, that's I mean, you wonder why, but the Gemara is saying, don't confuse money with a chalipin. It's only good in a purchase. All right, so we've gone back and forth here in a very interesting Gemara, and we'll again, the story isn't over, but we've reached a point where we see that money cannot be used in any measure for chalipin.
Okay, Shkola.